A desert wind carries secrets, but none as heavy as a forbidden love etched in blood and dust. In 1883, Evelyn Carter, a healer and teacher, arrives in Copper Creek with her ailing brother, seeking refuge in a town ruled by greed. Her courage draws the gaze of a silent Apache giant, Nantan, whose eyes hold the pain of a massacre survived. Their paths collide in a world that forbids their bond, leading to a kiss that defies empires and a vow that haunts the mountains. Will their love survive the wrath of a ruthless land baron? Subscribe, share where you're listening from, and uncover the truth hidden in the red rocks. The sun clawed at the horizon, spilling blood-red light over Copper Creek, Arizona in the summer of 1883. Dust hung thick in the air, a gritty veil that stung the eyes and coated the throat. Evelyn Carter stepped off the stagecoach, her boots crunching on the cracked earth, one hand steadying her ailing brother James, whose coughs rattled like dry bones. At 26, Evelyn was no delicate Eastern flower. Her brown hair, streaked with red, was tied back tight, and her gray eyes scanned the town with the wariness of a hawk. The ramshackle buildings leaned into each other like drunken prospectors, and the air carried the sharp tang of copper ore and desperation. Copper Creek wasn't a town. It was a gamble, a place where men clawed at the earth for wealth and lost their souls in the bargain. Evelyn and James had come for the house their father left them, a sagging wooden husk perched at the edge of a valley rich with copper veins. Their father, a dreamer who'd chased the frontier's promise, was long gone, leaving them only this relic and a handful of medical books. James, pale and thin, clung to her arm, his breath shallow. The dry air was supposed to save his lungs, but Evelyn wasn't betting on miracles. The townsfolk watched them, their eyes narrow under sweat-stained hats. A woman teaching letters and tending wounds was an oddity here, where survival demanded a gun or a pickaxe. Evelyn felt their stares, heavy as the heat, judging her calloused hands and the books in her satchel. She wasn't here to win friends. She was here to keep James alive and carve out a life free from the suffocating parlors of Philadelphia, where a woman's sharp mind was a sharper sin. Harlan Briggs, the mining baron who owned half the valley, wasted no time. He rode into view on a sleek black stallion, his broad frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the street. His smile was polished, but his eyes, cold as the copper he mined, fixed on Evelyn like she was a claim to be staked. "Miss Carter," he drawled, tipping his hat. "Welcome to Copper Creek. A lady like you deserves finer than this dust-choked hole." He offered a sack of flour and a bottle of whiskey, gifts that felt more like bait. Evelyn nodded, her voice steady but clipped. "Kind of you, Mr. Briggs. We'll manage." His gaze lingered, possessive, as if she were a nugget of ore he meant to extract. The house was a ruin, creaking boards, a roof half-eaten by time, and windows that rattled in the wind. Evelyn set to work, scrubbing floors and patching walls, while James rested, his coughs echoing through the empty rooms. By day, she opened a small schoolroom in a borrowed shed, teaching miners' children to read between their shifts in the shafts. By night, she pored over her father's medical texts, mixing remedies for fevers and cuts. The townsfolk came grudgingly, needing her skills, but wary of her Eastern ways. She stitched up a miner's gashed arm, delivered a baby in a stifling shack, and earned whispers of respect, though they came laced with suspicion. Briggs visited often, his boots thumping on her porch like a drumbeat of intent. "A woman like you shouldn't be alone in this hard land," he said, his voice smooth as snake oil. "I can offer protection, a proper home." His words were a cage, and Evelyn's skin prickled at the thought. She saw through his charm. The man wanted to own her, to parade her as a trophy to legitimize his grip on Copper Creek. The town was his chessboard, and she was a piece he meant to play. At night, when the desert wind howled, the townsfolk spoke of another shadow. Nantan, the Apache giant, a survivor of a massacre 20 years past. They said he lived in the Red Mountains, a silent specter whose presence stirred fear and old grudges. Evelyn overheard the tales in the general store, where men swapped stories over barrels of salt and coffee. "He's a ghost," one said, "watching from the cliffs." Another spat. "He's trouble, mark my words." The name Nantan lodged in her mind, a mystery wrapped in the desert's dust. If these tales of courage and secrets grip you, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. It keeps this story alive, and I'd love to know where you're listening from. Share it in the comments. It's like tossing a coin in the saloon for the next round of tales. What's Nantan hiding? And why does Briggs want Evelyn so badly? Stick around. The desert's got more to tell. The name Nantan lingered in Evelyn's thoughts, sharp as a spur caught in leather. By dusk, Copper Creek streets glowed under a bruised purple sky, the red mountains jagged against the horizon like the spine of some ancient beast. Evelyn stood on her porch, the air thick with the scent of creosote and the distant smoke from the smelter. James slept inside, his coughs quieter now, but each breath was a reminder of time slipping away. The whispers about Nantan, the Apache giant, echoed in her mind, tales of a man who walked alone, carrying the weight of a massacre from 1863. She didn't believe in ghosts, but something about his name felt alive, like a pulse beneath the desert's skin. She was locking the schoolroom shed one evening when trouble found her. 3 men, reeking of whiskey and sweat, loomed at the edge of the street, their shadows long in the lantern light. "Well, ain't you the fancy Eastern gal?" one slurred, his hand twitching toward a knife at his belt. "Teaching kids and playing nurse. Think you're too good for Copper Creek?" The others laughed, stepping closer, their boots kicking up dust. Evelyn's heart thudded, but she squared her shoulders, gripping the shed key like a weapon. "Step back," she said, voice low, steady as a loaded rifle. They didn't. A shadow moved, swift, silent, massive. Nantan emerged from the darkness, his presence like a storm rolling in. He stood over 6 feet, broad as a canyon wall, his long black hair tied back with a leather thong. His face, carved from bronze, was unreadable, but his eyes, dark and piercing, locked on the men with a force that stopped them cold. He said nothing, didn't need to. The air around him crackled with a danger sharper than any blade. The leader stammered, his knife hand dropping, and the trio backed away, muttering curses before vanishing into the night. Evelyn's breath caught as Nantan turned to her. Up close, he was monumental, his cotton shirt straining against a chest built for battle. Yet his movements were deliberate, almost graceful, like a mountain cat stalking prey. He reached into a pouch at his waist and pressed a small object into her hand. A copper bracelet etched with an eagle, its wings spread wide. The metal was cool, its weight grounding her racing pulse. Before she could speak, he was gone, melting into the shadows as if the desert had claimed him. The bracelet became her secret, tucked beneath her sleeve as she worked. Days bled into weeks, and Copper Creek's rhythm grew familiar, teaching children to scratch out letters in the dust, mixing salves for miners' burns, dodging Harlan Briggs' visits. His gifts piled up, sacks of sugar, bolts of cloth, but his eyes never softened, always calculating, like a man tallying a ledger. "You're wasting your talents on these urchins," he said once, leaning too close. "I could make you a queen in this valley." Evelyn smiled thinly, her fingers brushing the hidden bracelet. "I'm no one's queen, Mr. Briggs." The town's whispers grew louder. At the general store, where men haggled over tobacco and nails, Evelyn caught fragments of Nantan's legend. "He trades pelts sometimes," the storekeeper muttered. "Fox saw deer, clean as you please. Never speaks, just points." Another man, spitting into the dust, growled, "He's Apache. They don't belong here anymore." The hatred was raw, rooted in old wounds from raids long past. Evelyn listened, her mind turning over the bracelet's eagle, its wings a symbol she couldn't yet read. One night, unable to sleep, she walked to the edge of town, where the desert stretched vast and unyielding. The stars burned bright, and the red mountains loomed, their peaks cutting the sky like a warning. She pulled the bracelet from her sleeve, tracing its edges. Who was Nantan? A survivor, they said. But of what? And why had he chosen her, a stranger, to carry his token? The desert offered no answers, only the howl of a coyote, sharp and lonely. If these stories of shadows and courage pull you in, hit that subscribe button. It keeps the fire lit for tales like this. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments. It's like sharing a canteen under these stars. Why did Nantan save Evelyn? And what does that eagle mean? The desert's secrets are just beginning to unravel. The coyote's howl faded, but the desert's secrets clung to Evelyn like dust on her boots. Under a moon sharp as a sickle, she stood at Copper Creek's edge, the eagle bracelet heavy in her palm. Nantan's shadow lingered in her mind, a riddle wrapped in silence. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of her days hardened, teaching children to trace letters in a borrowed shed, mixing poultices for miners' sores, and tending to James, whose coughs grew wetter, more desperate. The red mountains loomed beyond the town, their peaks a silent call she couldn't ignore. Something was shifting inside her, like a river carving new paths through stone. One sweltering noon, a miner's boy, no older than 10, collapsed in the schoolroom, his skin burning with fever. Evelyn sent for the doctor, but he was drunk in the saloon, useless as a busted spur. She carried the boy to a shack at the town's edge, where his mother wrung her hands, tears cutting tracks through her dust-caked face. Evelyn worked fast, pressing damp cloths to his forehead, forcing sips of willow tea between his cracked lips. The hours dragged on, and hope was a fragile thread. Then, from the shadowed doorway, Nantan appeared, his massive frame filling the space like a storm cloud. In his hand was a pouch of dried herbs, their sharp, earthy scent cutting through the stifling air. "Boil these," he said, his voice low, like gravel underfoot. "Slow fire, 10 minutes." Evelyn stared, caught by the clarity of his English, precise yet heavy with an accent she couldn't place. She nodded, moving to the fire as he knelt by the boy, his calloused hands steadying the child's thrashing limbs. They worked in silence, the only sounds the crackle of flames and the boy's ragged breaths. By dawn, the fever broke, the boy's eyes fluttering open, weak but alive. His mother sobbed, clutching Evelyn's hands, but Nantan was already gone, a ghost swallowed by the morning noise. Word spread like wildfire. By evening, Copper Creek buzzed with whispers. Some called Evelyn a saint, others a fool for trusting an Apache. Harlan Briggs seized the moment, his shadow falling across her porch that night. "You're stirring trouble, Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth as polished iron, but his eyes gleamed with a predator's hunger. "Consorting with savages won't win you friends here." He leaned closer, his breath hot with whiskey. "I can shield you from their talk, make you untouchable." Evelyn stepped back, her fingers brushing the bracelet hidden under her sleeve. "I don't need your shield, Mr. Briggs," she said, her voice steady as a drawn bow. The town's mood soured. Miners' wives, once grateful for her care, now crossed the street to avoid her. Supplies at the general store grew scarce. Bandages, quinine, even flour vanished from the shelves. Briggs's hand was behind it, tightening the noose. Yet Evelyn's thoughts kept drifting to Nanton, to the herbs, to the way his silence spoke louder than words. She needed answers. Late one night, she rode to a hidden spring in a rocky arroyo, guided by a trader's whispered directions. The stars burned cold above, and the spring's murmur was the only sound in the vast dark. Nanton was there, his silhouette stark against the moonlit rocks. "You shouldn't come here," he said, not turning. "It's not safe." Evelyn dismounted, her boots crunching on gravel. "I need to know who you are," she said, holding up the bracelet. "Why this? Why me?" He faced her, his eyes catching the starlight, deep with a pain older than the mountains. "I was raised by a mission in Tucson," he said. "They taught me your words, your God. But my soul belongs to these peaks. The eagle is my people's sign. Freedom, strength. I gave it to you because you carry that strength, even if you don't see it." They spoke until the sky paled, two exiles sharing fragments of their worlds. He told of the Apache's songs, of spirits in the wind. She spoke of Philadelphia's gilded cages, of a life that choked her. The spring's ripples caught their words, holding them like a secret. But dawn brought danger. Hoofbeats echoed in the distance, Briggs's men patrolling closer than she'd thought. Nanton's hand grazed hers, a fleeting touch. "Go," he whispered, "but we will meet again." If these tales of defiance and hidden truths hook you, hit subscribe. It keeps the story's embers glowing. Drop a comment with where you're listening from. It's like passing a flask around the campfire. What's driving Briggs's vendetta, and what binds Nanton to Evelyn? The desert's whispering. Stay to hear it. Hoofbeats faded into the dawn, but Nanton's whispered promise, "We will meet again," burned in Evelyn's chest like a coal. The ride back to Copper Creek was a blur, the desert's vast silence pressing against her as the first light of 1883's autumn painted the red mountains gold. Her life had split into two worlds, the town, with its choking dust, and Harlan Briggs' tightening grip, and the hidden spring, where Nanton's words had cracked open something raw inside her. She tucked the eagle bracelet into her pocket, its weight a secret anchor as she faced another day of teaching, healing, and dodging the town's growing scorn. Copper Creek had turned on her. The miner's boy she'd saved was walking again, but the town's gratitude curdled into suspicion. Whispers followed her like shadows. Folks called her the Apache's friend, their voices sharp with betrayal. At the general store, the clerk's eyes slid away when she asked for quinine. Shelves that once held her supplies now stood bare. Briggs's influence was a noose, pulling tighter with each passing day. He didn't visit her porch anymore. Instead, his men lingered nearby, their gazes heavy, their hands resting on pistol grips. "Stay in line, Miss Carter," one muttered, spitting tobacco into the dust. She met his stare, her jaw set like flint, but fear gnawed at her. James's coughs worsened, each one a knife in her gut, and her remedies were running low. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a girl from her schoolroom tugged at Evelyn's sleeve. "Miss, there's trouble at the miners' camp," she whispered, eyes wide. "My brother's hurt bad." Evelyn grabbed her medical bag and followed, the girl leading her to a cluster of shacks where the air reeked of sweat and despair. The boy, barely 16, lay on a cot, his leg mangled from a collapsed mine shaft. Blood soaked the dirt floor, and his moans cut through the dusk. Evelyn worked fast, cleaning the wound, stitching skin with thread that trembled in her hands. The miners watched, their faces hard, but none offered help. Her ties to Nanton had marked her as an outsider. As she tied off the last stitch, a shadow fell across the shack's entrance. Nantan stood there, his silhouette a monolith against the fading light. He carried a bundle of roots and leaves, their bitter scent sharp in the cramped space. "For the pain," he said, his voice low, steady as the desert's pulse. He knelt beside her, grinding the roots into a paste with a stone, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. Evelyn watched, her hand still bloody as he applied the paste to the boy's leg. The boy's breathing eased, his face softening under the medicine's touch. Nantan's eyes met hers, a fleeting glance that carried the weight of their shared secret. The miner's stares burned hotter than the noon sun. "What's he doing here?" one growled, hand twitching toward his knife. Evelyn stood, placing herself between Nantan and the crowd. "He's helping," she snapped, her voice a whip crack. "Unless you've got a better cure, step back." They hesitated, fear and anger warring in their eyes, but Nantan's presence, silent, towering, held them at bay. He left as quietly as he'd come, slipping into the night like smoke. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat by James's bedside, his labored breaths a cruel metronome. The eagle bracelet lay on the table, glinting in the lamplight. She needed to see Nantan again, to understand the bridge they were building between their worlds. At midnight, she slipped out, riding to a narrow canyon where a trader had once mentioned a hidden trail. The air was cold, the stars like scattered embers. Nantan was waiting, his figure carved against the canyon wall, a bow slung across his back. "You're reckless," he said, but his tone held no rebuke, only a quiet respect. They sat by a small fire, the flames casting shadows that danced like spirits. Nantan spoke of his people's ways, the eagle's flight, the songs of the wind that carried their history. Evelyn shared her own exile, the weight of a world that saw her mind as a threat. Their words wove a fragile thread, binding them in a space neither fully belonged to. But the canyon wasn't safe. A distant clatter of hooves, Briggs' men patrolling too close, broke the night. Nantan doused the fire, his hand gripping hers. "They're hunting," he said, his voice a low growl. "Not just me. You too." By the fall of 1883, the town felt like a trap, its streets choked with dust and distrust. Evelyn's days were a gauntlet, teaching children who whispered behind her back, tending James's worsening coughs, and dodging the glares of townsfolk who now spat, Apache lover, under their breath. The eagle bracelet hidden in her pocket was her only tether to something true, but truth in Copper Creek was a dangerous thing. Harlan Briggs's grip tightened. His men burned a miner's shack, blaming Apache raiders, and the town's fear boiled over. At a saloon meeting, Briggs stood on a crate, his voice booming like a preacher's. "Nantan's band stole my cattle," he declared, holding up a branded hide. "They're a threat to us all." The crowd roared, their anger fueled by whiskey and old grudges. Evelyn, watching from the back, noticed the hide's edges. Too clean, too deliberate. Her gut twisted. This wasn't a theft. It was a lie, and she needed proof before Briggs turned fear into blood. She started small, eyes sharp as she walked the town's edges. Near the copper mine, she found hoof prints swept clean, as if someone had brushed away evidence. At dusk, she followed a faint trail north, her horse picking through sagebrush and scree. The red mountains loomed, their shadows swallowing the light. In a narrow ravine, hidden by twisted junipers, she found what Briggs wanted no one to see. A dozen cattle, branded with his mark, penned in a makeshift corral. The ground was scuffed, the tracks erased, but a single horseshoe nail glinted in the dirt, proof of a cover-up. Evelyn's heart pounded as she crouched, pocketing the nail. She needed more, something to crack Briggs's facade. Back in town, she lingered at the saloon's back door, where his foreman, a scar-faced man named Judd, drank with his crew. Their laughter was loose, careless, and Evelyn caught a fragment. Boss said move the herd quick before anyone sniffs around. Her blood ran cold. The lie was unraveling, but confronting Briggs directly was suicide. She needed an ally, someone inside his circle with a shred of conscience. She found him in Tom Riley, a young stable hand who'd once thanked her for bandaging his hand after a horse kicked him. Tom was barely 20, his eyes still holding a flicker of decency. She cornered him at the stables, the air thick with hay and leather. "Tom, I know about the cattle," she whispered, holding up the nail. "Briggs is framing Nanton. Help me, or blood's on your hands." Tom's face paled, his hands trembling as he brushed down a mare. "Miss Carter, you don't know what you're asking," he muttered. "Briggs'll kill me." "Women and children will die if you don't," she pressed, her voice low but fierce. Tom looked away, his jaw tight, then nodded. "2 nights ago, Judd moved the cattle to that ravine," he said, barely audible. "Briggs planned it. Said it'd get the town riled up to clear the Apaches out." Evelyn's breath caught. "There's more," Tom added, his voice breaking. 20 years ago in '63, Briggs hired guns to wipe out an Apache camp for the Copperland. A boy got away. I heard Judd say it was Nanton. The truth hit like a bullet. Briggs's empire was built on blood, and Nanton was the living scar of his crime. Evelyn's mind raced. This wasn't just about cattle or her. It was about erasing a witness to a massacre that had stolen a people's land. She thanked Tom, slipping into the night, but danger followed. Judd stepped from the shadows, his scar glinting in the moonlight. "You're digging in the wrong dirt, Miss Carter," he sneered, his hand on his pistol. Evelyn froze, the nail burning in her pocket. Before she could answer, a low whistle cut the air, a canyon wren's call, sharp and deliberate. Nanton. He emerged from the darkness, his knife gleaming, his eyes locked on Judd. "Walk away," he said, his voice a low rumble, like thunder over the mountains. Judd hesitated, then backed off, cursing under his breath. Nanton turned to Evelyn, his face a mask of resolve. "You've found his lie," he said. "Now it's war." Nanton's words, "Now it's war," hung in the air like smoke over a smoldering fire. Evelyn stood frozen, the canyon wren's call still ringing in her ears, as Judd's retreating shadow melted into the night. The red mountains loomed above Copper Creek, their jagged peaks clawing at a sky heavy with storm clouds in the late fall of 1883. The horseshoe nail in her pocket burned like a brand, proof of Harlan Briggs's lie, but proof was worthless if she couldn't stop the bloodbath he was planning. Nanton's eyes, dark and unyielding, met hers, and she knew the truth had chained them to a fight neither could escape. Briggs moved fast. By morning, posters nailed to every post in Copper Creek screamed of Nanton's crimes, cattle theft, arson, threats to the town. A posse was forming, men with rifles and whiskey-fueled rage, ready to ride to the mountains. Evelyn's heart raced as she slipped through the streets, avoiding the glares of townsfolk who now saw her as a traitor. James, weaker by the day, clutched her hand at home, his eyes pleading. "Don't go out there, Evie," he rasped, but she couldn't stay. Nanton's people, women and children included, were targets, and she was the only one who knew the truth. She was saddling her horse at dusk when Briggs's men struck. Judd and 2 others, their faces hard as flint, grabbed her outside the stable. "You're coming with us, Miss Carter," Judd growled, his scar twisting in the lantern light. "Boss wants you to see what happens to those who cross him." They bound her wrists, rough rope biting into her skin, and threw her onto a horse. The ride was a blur of dust and fear, the red mountains rising like a fortress, as they headed to a desolate ravine. There, penned in shadows, were the stolen cattle, their lowing a grim confirmation of Briggs's scheme. Tied to a twisted juniper, Evelyn faced Briggs himself. He stood tall, his black hat tipped back, a king surveying his trap. "You're a smart one, Miss Carter," he said, his voice smooth as snake venom. "Too smart. Those Apaches are done, and you'll watch it happen." He planned to leave her there, a witness to the posse's slaughter, then rescue her as the town's hero. His men rode off to join the posse, leaving Evelyn alone, the rope cutting deeper with every struggle. The ravine was silent, save for the wind's low moan and the distant rumble of thunder. Then, a faint sound, a pebble skittering down the ravine's edge. Nantan appeared, dropping from a ledge above, his knife flashing as he cut her ropes in one swift motion. "I tracked them," he said, his voice low, taut with controlled fury. "They mean to kill my people." Evelyn rubbed her wrists, the blood rushing back. "It's worse," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Briggs planned it all. The cattle, the fire, even the massacre 20 years ago. You're the boy who survived." Nantan's face hardened, his eyes glinting with a grief sharpened into resolve. He led her to a high vantage point in the Red Mountains, where the rocks formed a natural choke point. "They'll come through here," he said, pointing to a narrow pass. "We stop them." Working in the fading light, they rigged a trap. Boulders balanced on the pass's edges, ready to fall with a single push. Nantan moved with a warrior's precision, his hand steady as he tested the rock's weight. Evelyn, her hand still raw, helped roll smaller stones, her fear drowned by a fierce need to fight back. The air grew heavy, the storm closing in, its first drops spitting against the dry earth. As night fell, Nantan handed her a small knife, its blade worn but sharp. "Stay hidden," he said, pointing to a crevice in the rock. "If I fall, run." Evelyn gripped the knife, her voice steady. "I'm not running." His eyes met hers, a flicker of something unspoken passing between them. Trust, maybe, or something deeper, born in the crucible of their shared defiance. He nodded, then vanished into the shadows, his bow slung across his back. The storm growled closer, lightning splitting the sky, and Evelyn crouched in the crevice, the knife cold against her palm. The pass below was a death trap, and Briggs's men were riding straight into it. Evelyn crouched in the crevice, the knife in her hand, cold, as the rain slicked rock around her. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the Red Mountain's jagged teeth in the late fall of 1883. Nantan's shadow had vanished into the dark, but his presence lingered, a steady pulse in the chaos. The air was thick with the scent of wet sage and impending violence, the storm's breath hot and restless. Evelyn's heart hammered, not from fear alone, but from the weight of what was coming, a reckoning for a 20-year-old crime that had carved Nantan's life into a blade of vengeance. The first hoofbeats echoed through the pass, faint at first, then growing to a thunder that matched the sky's fury. Briggs's men rode in, 6 of them, their lanterns swinging like fireflies in the rain. Judd led the pack, his scar a pale slash in the flickering light, his rifle slung low. They laughed, their voices raw with bravado, unaware of the trap above. Evelyn gripped the knife tighter, her breath shallow, every muscle coiled. She could see the cattle pen in the distance, its gate still open from Nantan's earlier sabotage. The animals gone, their absence a silent accusation of Briggs's lie. A sharp twang cut the air, an arrow fired from a hidden perch high on the canyon wall. It struck Judd's horse in the flank, the beast rearing with a scream that split the night. Judd hit the ground hard, cursing, his rifle skittering across the rocks. Before the others could react, Nantan dropped from a ledge above, landing with the grace of a mountain lion. His knife flashed, a blur of steel, and the nearest rider fell. His throat opened in a silent cry. The storm roared, rain lashing down in sheets, turning the pass into a slick, muddy gauntlet. The men scattered, their shouts drowned by thunder. Nantan moved like a specter, weaving through the chaos, his bow drawn taut. Another arrow flew, pinning a rider's arm to his saddle, his scream lost in the wind. Evelyn's hands shook, the knife heavy, but she stayed hidden, her eyes locked on Nantan. He was no mere warrior. He was the canyon itself, every rock and shadow his ally. The boulders they'd rigged trembled above, their weight poised to crush. Nantan caught her gaze for a split second, his eyes fierce, and gave a sharp nod. The signal. She scrambled from the crevice, her boot slipping on wet stone, and reached the rope they'd tied to the first boulder. With a grunt, she pulled, muscles burning as the rock shifted, then tumbled. It crashed down the pass, dragging smaller stones in a deafening roar. The men below shouted, their horses rearing as the avalanche blocked their path. One rider was caught, his scream cut short under the crushing weight. Judd, scrambling to his feet, fired wildly, his bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls. "You damn savage," he bellowed, his voice cracking with fear. Nantan didn't answer. He charged, a shadow in the storm, his knife meeting Judd's pistol in a brutal clash. The foreman was no coward, his blade flashed as he parried, but Nantan was a force of nature. He drove Judd back, their boots slipping in the mud, until a final slash sent the foreman sprawling, blood mixing with the rain. The remaining men, panicked, tried to flee, but the pass was a trap. Boulders on one side, Nantan on the other. Another arrow flew, and another man fell, the fight bleeding out as fast as it had begun. But Briggs wasn't with them. Evelyn's stomach twisted as she scanned the chaos. Lightning flashed, revealing a figure at the pass's mouth. Briggs, astride his black stallion, his face a mask of rage. He'd stayed back, letting his men take the brunt, but now he spurred forward, a revolver gleaming in his hand. "Nantan!" he roared, his voice carrying over the storm. "You think you can take me?" He fired, the shot grazing Nantan's shoulder, blood blooming dark against his shirt. Nantan didn't flinch, his bow already drawn, an arrow nocked. Evelyn's breath caught. She stepped from the crevice, the knife raised, her voice a raw shout. "Briggs, stop!" He turned, his eyes narrowing, but before he could aim, Nantan's arrow flew, striking the stallion's chest. The horse collapsed, throwing Briggs into the mud. Nantan closed the distance in 3 strides, his knife raised, but Briggs was quick, rolling to his feet, his revolver spitting fire. A bullet clipped Nantan's leg, slowing him, and Briggs lunged, tackling him to the ground. They grappled, a tangle of fury and steel, the storm's roar drowning their grunts. Evelyn ran toward them, her boots sinking in the mud, the knife trembling in her grip. Briggs had Nantan pinned, his revolver pressed to Nantan's temple. "You're done, Apache," Briggs snarled, "and your woman watches you die." Evelyn's heart stopped, but she didn't hesitate. She charged, slamming the knife's hilt into Briggs's wrist, forcing the gun to drop. Briggs roared, swinging at her, but Nantan surged up, his strength unbroken. He drove his shoulder into Briggs, sending him staggering toward the pass's edge, where the remaining boulders teetered. Lightning flashed again, and Nantan pushed. The final boulder broke free, rolling with a sound like the earth's own wrath. Briggs screamed, his arms flailing as the rock crushed him against the canyon wall, his body crumpling like a broken toy. The storm swallowed his cry, leaving only the patter of rain and the groan of settling stones. Nantan stood, blood streaming from his wounds, his chest heaving. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes raw with pain and something fiercer. Justice, paid in full for the massacre of 1863. The pass was silent now, the bodies of Briggs' men strewn like fallen timber. Evelyn dropped the knife, her hands shaking, and stepped toward Nantan. He swayed, his injuries catching up, but he caught her arm, steadying himself. "It's over," he said, his voice rough as gravel. But it wasn't. Hoofbeats echoed again, distant, but growing closer. The posse, drawn by the gunfire, was coming. Nantan's face tightened, his eyes scanning the pass. "They'll hunt me," he said. "They'll never believe the truth." Evelyn gripped his arm, her voice fierce. Then, "We make them believe." She pointed to the scattered cattle brands, the broken corral, evidence of Briggs's lie. But Nantan shook his head, his gaze distant, fixed on the mountains. "My people need me now," he said. "This fight isn't yours." Evelyn's throat tightened, the weight of his words sinking in. The storm had cleared, but a deeper storm was brewing. The town's fear, their hatred, would turn on them both. Nantan pulled her close, his bloodied hand cupping her face. "You fought with me," he said, his voice low, resonant with the desert's own strength. "That's enough." He pressed something into her hand, the eagle bracelet, its copper warm from his touch. "Keep it," he said. "Remember." Before she could speak, he turned, limping toward the canyon's edge, his silhouette blending with the rocks. The posse's hoofbeats grew louder, and Evelyn knew she had to act fast. She hid the bracelet, her resolve hardening. The truth would be her weapon now, but it came at a cost. The Red Mountains stood silent as Tom Riley's hoofbeats faded into the drizzle, carrying the truth about Briggs's crimes back to Copper Creek. Evelyn and Nantan remained under the overhang, the storm's last breaths washing the blood from the pass below. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and gunpowder, a grim reminder of the battle won, but the war still looming. In the late fall of 1883, the desert held its judgment, and Evelyn felt its weight in her bones, the rifle still cold in her hands. Nantan's eyes, dark as the cliffs around them, held a storm of their own. Gratitude, grief, and something deeper, unspoken. They had defied Briggs, but Copper Creek's hatred was a beast not so easily slain. They moved quickly, climbing higher into the mountains to a narrow ledge overlooking the valley. The town's lights flickered below, faint as dying embers, a world that felt both distant and dangerously close. Evelyn's breath burned in her chest, her hands raw from the fight, but she kept pace with Nantan, his stride as sure as a mountain goat's. He stopped at a shallow cave, its mouth hidden by twisted junipers, and gestured for her to sit. The cave was cool, its walls etched with faint carvings, spirals and eagles, marks of a people who'd called these peaks home long before copper drew men like Briggs. Nantan lit a small fire, its glow casting shadows that danced like ghosts. "We can't stay," he said, his voice low, rough from the battle. "The town will hunt me, truth or no truth." Evelyn nodded, the eagle bracelet in her pocket a heavy reminder of their bond. "Tom will tell them," she said, though her voice wavered. "He's seen the cattle, heard the truth about the massacre. They'll have to listen." Nantan's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the fire. "They listen to fear," he said. "Your people see mine as shadows to be erased. Truth ends to their guns." She wanted to argue, to believe Copper Creek could change, but the memory of the townsfolk's glares, spitting Apache lover like a curse, choked her words. Nantan was right. The truth might sway a few, like Tom, but fear was a stronger master. She thought of James, wasting away in their crumbling house, his coughs a ticking clock. She couldn't abandon him, but leaving Nantan felt like tearing out her own heart. The cave's silence pressed in, broken only by the fire's crackle and the distant howl of a coyote, mourning the night. Nantan reached into his pouch and pulled out the copper bracelet, its eagle glinting in the firelight. He pressed it into her hand, his fingers rough but gentle. "Keep this," he said. "It's my vow. To the eagle, to my people, to you." His voice dropped, softer now, like the wind through the junipers. "I wanted to be the first to kiss you, Evelyn Carter, and the last you love. But this world," he paused, his eyes searching hers, raw with a pain older than the mountains. "This world has no place for us." Evelyn's throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. She clutched the bracelet, its edges biting into her palm. "We can make a place," she said, her voice fierce despite the ache. "North, to Canada. West, to California. Somewhere they don't know us." Nantan's face softened, a sad smile flickering like the fire. "You're brave," he said. "But a white woman and an Apache? We'd be hunted like wolves, not for love, but for sport." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, and for a moment, the cave held only them. No town, no guns, no past. Their lips met, a kiss born of desperation and truth, tasting of rain and blood and the desert's wild heart. It wasn't soft or sweet, it was a collision, fierce and fleeting, a vow sealed in the face of loss. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the cave's carvings, and Evelyn felt the weight of Nantan's life, his survival, his fight, his soul, pressed against her own. When they parted, breathless, the storm had stilled, leaving only the drip of water from the cave's mouth. "You must go back," Nantan said, his voice steady but heavy. "Live, Evelyn. Live for your brother, for the truth." She shook her head, tears falling now. "And you? What will you do?" He looked out at the mountains, their peaks lost in the dark. "I'll do what my people have always done, survive. The eagle flies alone." He stood, his silhouette filling the cave's entrance, and she knew this was goodbye. The bracelet burned in her hand, a piece of him she'd carry forever. They descended the mountain in silence, the mud slick under their boots. At the valley's edge, where the desert met Copper Creek's outskirts, Nantan stopped. The town was quiet, but hoofbeats echoed in the distance, more riders, drawn by the battle's echoes. "Tell them I fled," he said. "Let them hunt a ghost." He cupped her face, his hands calloused but tender, and kissed her forehead, a final seal on their vow. Then he turned, climbing into the mountains with the grace of a shadow, vanishing into the night. Evelyn rode back alone, the bracelet now around her wrist, its eagle a silent witness. The town was waking, lanterns flickering as men gathered, rifles in hand. Tom Riley stood at the saloon steps, his face bruised but resolute, shouting the truth about Briggs's lies. Some listened, their anger faltering. Others gripped their guns tighter, fear drowning out reason. Evelyn dismounted, her voice steady as she backed Tom's story. "Briggs framed Nantan," she said, holding up the horseshoe nail. "He killed for the Copperland 20 years ago. Nantan's gone, but the truth isn't." The crowd wavered, torn between old hatreds and new doubts. Sheriff Tate, a weathered man under Briggs's thumb, stepped forward, his eyes narrow. "You're lucky to be alive, Miss Carter," he said, but his tone held no warmth. "We'll handle this." The posse dispersed, some chasing shadows into the mountains, others muttering about justice. Tom caught her eye, nodding once, a silent promise to keep speaking. Evelyn returned to her house, where James slept, his breathing shallow but steady. She sat by his side, the bracelet glinting in the lamplight, and wept, not for the battle, but for the man who'd given her his heart and taken nothing but his freedom. Weeks later, Evelyn and James left Copper Creek, and the house sold for a pittance to fund their journey to California. The town's story became legend. Briggs, the villain, undone by his own lies. Nantan, the fugitive, lost to the mountains. Evelyn, the woman who'd stood against a tyrant. But the truth lived in her alone. The kiss in the cave, the eagle's vow, the man who'd fought for his people and let her go to save her. She wore the bracelet every day, its copper warm against her skin, a reminder of a love that burned brighter than the desert sun. In California, Evelyn built a new life, teaching and healing under gentler skies. James grew stronger, his coughs fading, but her heart stayed in the Red Mountains, with a man whose name she'd never speak aloud again. The eagle bracelet caught the light as she worked, its wings a silent song of freedom and sacrifice. Copper Creek forgot her, its dust settling over the graves of its secrets. But Evelyn carried Nantan's vow, a flame that would never die. The desert wind carries the echo of Evelyn and Nantan's story, a tale of love and sacrifice etched into the Red Mountain's heart. In 1883, their forbidden bond defied a world built on greed and fear, leaving behind a copper bracelet and a vow that outlasted the dust of Copper Creek. Nantan's shadow may have vanished into the peaks, but his courage and Evelyn's defiance burn bright, a testament to a love too fierce for the world to hold. The eagle's wings still soar in her memory, a silent promise of freedom and truth. Your thoughts on their journey mean the world to me. Drop a comment and share what this story stirred in you. Did Nantan's sacrifice break your heart, or did Evelyn's strength inspire you? Where are you listening from? Let's keep these tales alive together. I'm grateful for every moment you've spent in this desert with me, and I can't wait to share another story under these stars. Until then, keep the fire burning.